Hi, my name is Patrick Condon. I teach at UBC. I've been teaching at UBC since 1992, and my specialty is in urban city design, sustainable city design, and I've written over the years about city design, particularly about what's going on in Vancouver. The housing market is absolutely broken, and the only way it would be fixed without us intervening would be if the global economy collapses and somehow Vancouver escapes, which is very unlikely. So barring that, somebody has to fix it or it's not going to get fixed. And the federal government and the provincial government show no real inclination to put the kind of money into the problem that Vancouver is facing. So it really requires Vancouver to do something. So far I'm not seeing particularly at the mayoral level, candidates coming up with a reasonable plan that's in measure with the severity of the problem. The crisis in Vancouver is like no other part of the world. We have the lowest salaries virtually of anywhere in North America, certainly of any major city in North America. Our salaries are the lowest of any major city in Canada, and our salaries for tech workers are like roughly half of what starting wages are in San Francisco, for example. And yet we have among the 3 or 4 highest housing prices throughout the world. So salaries are extremely unsuited for housing prices. I have proposed that in the face of this, unless housing prices come down by 100%, unlikely, it's never happened, unless salaries increase by 200%, unlikely, impossible actually, then unless we want our people who work in this city to have no place to live or be sleeping 6 to a bed, we have no option but to actually intervene in the marketplace. And that is why I have said we need a non-market for housing to be a countervailing force against the market, which is broken. It's not a completely unprecedented situation. They've done this in many places around the world, notably in Vienna, which is a city I point to a lot. We're faced with similar circumstances at the beginning of the 20th century. The city government there set about to increase their non-market housing from 0 all the way to 60% of the people now live in non-market housing. By non-market housing, let me be clear. What we're talking about is co-ops, buildings owned by nonprofit corporations, buildings owned by individual owners but sitting on city land or land trust land. Somehow there are many devices to separate housing from the housing market. Those are some of them. Places come to break points, and usually they come to break points when the situation becomes so severe that no one is listening to the old solutions anymore. For example, using the Vienna example once again, yeah, for centuries, people who worked in the city of Vienna tolerated their deprived circumstances until the cataclysm of World War I and the extreme poverty of the workers and the outrageously high rents came together in a force that became overwhelming, and the Habsburg Empire collapsed. And a left-wing government came into power in 1918 and immediately set about to transform the housing market by taxing the landlords and using that money in order to build housing for the workers. Prior to that time, only landlords had a vote. They completely controlled politics in the city. It wasn't until after the fall of the Habsburg Empire that that the rest of the people were enfranchised. Well, you know, that's sort of similar to what situation we find ourselves in here, where the only people who wield influence in this town are landlords, property owners, landowners, and developers. And that's been the situation for a long time. The mass rezoning is very badly timed because it springs from 4 or 5 years of discussions based on the principle that if we only had more supply, things would become more affordable. It's only within the past couple of years that to the average citizen and certainly to the average renter, that's become obviously not true. So it's a legacy of a failed failed understanding of what's really going on in this market. And the mass rezoning that they just did is both too little and too much at the same time. Just shifting single-family homes to duplexes is a very minor move. Shifting something that costs $3 million into two pieces that cost $1.5 million is not going to help 90% of the people in this city unless they have access to a huge amount of capital to play the game. It does nothing for renters. It does nothing for wage earners who don't have access to that capital. And it's also too much because it was done without really consulting in the neighborhoods. You know, the city used to have a long tradition of actually consulting with people in the city before they did anything like this, a massive rezone. This city has spent 30 years of refusing to do that conversation with the neighborhoods and engage in the planning necessary to come up with a city plan. Vancouver is the only city in the region that doesn't have a city plan. Why is it the only city in the region that doesn't have a city plan? It's because by virtue of being a charter city, it's the only city in the region that is not forced to have a city plan. And not having a city plan has been great for city councils and developers because they can use their discretionary authority to rezone here, there, and everywhere in what is really spot zoning a tower complex in one corner of the city and another corner of the city. It wasn't so bad when it was downtown, when you had large industrial tracts that were appropriate to that kind of what they call comprehensive zoning. But to drop these towers into this neighborhood or that neighborhood in return for a city council being able to deliver a community center or a daycare center or whatever goodie they thought that they wanted to deliver and get credit for is no way to plan. In other parts of North America, spot zoning is illegal. It ought to be illegal here as well. And the way to make it illegal is to have a citywide plan where you don't have to change zoning first here and first there and then some other place. A decent city is supposed to have a plan for what its future is going to be like. A zoning map is not supposed to be a record of all the spot zones, the locations where you felt like changing. It's supposed to predict what you want the city to be like in the future. That's not what we have now. So far, I haven't seen any mayoral candidates making sense. I remain hopeful that one of them will make sense. And the thing I keep listening for is whether or not they understand that the city has to participate in the creation of that 50% non-market housing to create a separate market from the market housing. Absent a willingness to devote resources, and by resources obviously we mean money, we can't depend on federal and provincial sources to come up with all the money we need to fix this problem. We have to figure out how to use the money that's flowing in the billions into development and capture some of that money and give that into the non-market sector. We have to figure out how to tax land generally, where most of this wealth is ending up, and capture some of that wealth in the form of a land tax that could be used for that non-market housing. Absent somebody that's willing to bell the cat and be courageous enough to say the things that need to be said about we need some money, where's that money going to come from? And a lot of that money has to come from local sources. Where is that exactly going to come from? Until I hear a mayoral candidate saying that, I'm not convinced that we have anybody in that cohort that has the courage to say what needs to be said. In the mayor's slot, there's such a plethora of candidates, they're almost indistinguishable. You have to look for people who are talking about how we are going to provide housing for the wage earners. How much is that going to cost? It's going to cost billions. People who are unwilling to use the billion word, the B word, I wouldn't trust at all. It's going to cost billions per year, at least $1 billion a year, every year from now on in order to fix this. Even to come even remotely close to addressing this problem is going to cost more than the Broadway subway times 5, because this is the situation we find ourselves in. Furthermore, I think that the mayor is not the most important position. The mayor is only a super councilor, really has no more legislative authority than any other member of the council. The mayor's only real significant power is to chair the council meetings. Otherwise, it's the city manager that works at the behest of the whole council, not just the mayor. So who occupies the other seats at that council table is very important. I'm not hopeful unless the people of this city at this election are willing to do what is necessary to be done to turn this ship around and reverse course, alter our dependence on the marketplace to provide housing, and return to a period or an attitude that it's the public's responsibility. It's all of our responsibility to make sure that the fundamentals of life, and housing is a fundamental right for Canadian citizens. We signed on to that in our commitment to housing as a fundamental right in the United Nations Charter. We're a signatory of that, but we're ignoring that. We're ignoring that provincially, federally, and locally, and in no place in this country is it more severe than here in Vancouver. If this isn't the moment when we change direction, I simply don't know what is.